Hello everyone, welcome to IAS Help Desk. We have started a series of previous year questions where we will be discussing topics through previous year questions. So through this way, we can also come across the trends and analysis of the types of question that has been asked in UPSC question paper. So this is our third video. Here we are discussing about parliamentary form of government. Also, before we start this basic concepts about polity and the form of government and the NCRT based things, I would really like to highlight something that we come across during our preparation. तो हमारी preparation के starting phase पर ही हमें कहा जाता है कि आप NCRT से आप अपना preparation start कीजिए. So for example, if you look into this polity subject itself, it has number of NCRTs that we are required to read to make our base and build our concepts. So we as an IAS help desk, we have come up with an idea of compilation of NCRTs. You can go to our website जहाँ पर आपको एक साथ कई सारे NCRTs का compilation एक gist मिलेगा जो कि ना कि सिर्फ आपको NCRT पढ़ने का time save करेगा, also with the trend analysis with previous year questions, the type of questions that UPSC is asking with the analytical part of it, and the whole together the gist of NCRT, you can find it over there. So you can find a very convenient NCRT in the name of NCRT Digest in a very lucid language, which is easy to understand, and in a time bound manner you can complete the whole NCRT also. So let's begin with our video. Let's start with the discussion of this parliamentary form of government. So we'll be discussing the basic first, where we'll be understanding what is parliament and what are the different forms of government. Basically, we are going to compare with the presidential form of government, which is really basic and really required for the further understanding of the political concept. So before we go into the parliamentary form of government, let's understand what is parliamentary system. So parliamentary system of government is one in which the executive is responsible to the legislature for its policies and acts. So the Constitution of India, it provides for a parliamentary form of government both at center and at the state level. And now if we look into the salient features of parliamentary form of government, then we can see that there is fusion of powers, which means the executive is part of the legislature. That means parliamentary system, it ensures that there is harmonious relationship and there is cooperation between the legislative and executive organs of the government. So the executive is also part of legislature and both are interdependent at work. यानी कि दोनों एक दूसरे पर dependent है एक दूसरे पर. As a result, there is a less scope for disputes and conflicts between these two organs. यानी कि executive और legislature में conflict कम हो interdependency की वजह से, इसलिए ये एक फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट हम लोगों ने चूज किया था. नेक्स्ट वी हैव कलेक्टिव रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी. कलेक्टिव रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी का मतलब है दैट द मिनिस्टर्स आर रिस्पॉन्सिबल टू द पार्लियामेंट फॉर ऑल द एक्ट्स ऑफ ओमिशन एंड कमीशन. Also, the parliament, it exercises control over the ministers through various devices like question hour, adjournment motion, no confidence motion. We'll look into all these terminology into detail in our further videos. Today, we are just talking about the basics of these two forms of government. Next, we have leadership change. So here, the head of the government, that is Prime Minister, can change without an election if they lose parliamentary support, which means that there is a ready alternative government. In case the ruling party loses its majority, the head of the state can invite the opposition party to form the government. So this means an alternative government can be formed without fresh elections. And then we have no fixed term, which means that the government's duration is not fixed. Why? What does this mean? विच मीन्स कि गवर्नमेंट को अगर अपने काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स का सपोर्ट नहीं मिला तो वो उसका गवर्नमेंट फॉल कर जाएगी. सो इट वोंट होल्ड एनी कॉन्फिडेंस इन द पार्लियामेंट. देन देयर हैज टू बी फ्रेश इलेक्शंस. So next we see as bicameral and bicameral or unicameral. सो बाईकैमरल और यूनिकैमरल का मतलब क्या होता है कि यूनिकैमरल का मतलब होता है कि इट्स अ यूनिकैमरल लेजिस्लेचर, इट्स अ फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट इन विच only one central body has the authority to enact laws and make policies or to take decisions. Whereas in bicameral legislature, it has two houses of parliament, that is the lower house representing the people of the country, and the upper house representing the states. Now let's have a look on the advantages of parliamentary form of government. So the first is political stability. So how do we have this political stability? So political stability, it comes through comes through in the sense like government tends to have a majority support in parliament, reducing instability. So why there is stability? Because there is a better communication between the legislature and executive. So since the executive is a part of the legislature and generally the majority of the legislature supports the government, it is easier to pass any law and implement them. So next is efficiency. So there is a quick decision making, and as the executive and legislature branches are integrated. So since also everything is interconnected, so because of there is better coordination, there is quick decision making. Also, the branches are integrated, so they can have an effective implementation also. Next is accountability. So how it is accountable? Through regular questioning of the executive by the legislature, it ensures accountability. Then we have representation. Representation का मतलब है कि representing diverse groups. So in this system, the parliament, it offers representation to diverse groups of the country, and this is especially important for a country like India where diverse population is living. So cabinet ministers are drawn from the majority party that reflects the people's choice. After that, we will see the disadvantages of parliamentary form of government. So the first is dominance of majority. Dominance of majority का मतलब क्या है कि there can be a dictatorship of the cabinet also, which means that whenever the ruling party it enjoys an absolute majority in the parliament, the cabinet becomes autocratic and it exercises nearly unlimited power. So though it never happens, but it tends to be like that. Also, it can lead to a tyranny of the majority and minority voices being marginalized. So next is inefficient opposition, that is limited power and resources for opposition parties. यानी कि अगर opposition party उतनी strong नहीं है to put a regular check or ask relevant questions, then also the ruling party might become inefficient. Then we have partisan gridlock. That means that it can result in political instability if coalition breakdowns. So अगर government coalition से बनी है, किसी एक majority party से नहीं, बहुत सारे parties को मिलाकर बनी है, then वहाँ पर अगर किसी का support चला गया तो वो एक एक वहाँ पर balance उसको खराब कर सकता है और जिसकी वजह से एक instability form of situation create हो सकता है. Then we have short-lived governments where frequent elections and shifting alliances can lead to short-lived governments. Also, we have weak checks and balances, that is limited separation of powers may result into government overreach. So यहाँ पर limited separation of power कहने का मतलब ये है कि in the parliamentary system, the legislature and the executive are together and inseparable. So the cabinet acts as a leader of the legislature as well as the executive also. So hence the whole system of the government goes against the letter and spirit of the theory of separation of powers. So now the question might be that why did we choose or why did we adopt parliamentary form of government? So there are many reasons. I'll just highlight the major ones. So the first I'll say there was a familiarity with the system, that the constitution makers were somewhat familiar with the parliamentary system as it had been in the operation in India during the British rule also. The next, I will say that preference to more responsibility. So the weightage was given to more responsibility, where Constituent Assembly wanted to adopt a system that was both stable and responsible. Also, looking into the nature of Indian society, the parliamentary system, it offers a greater scope for giving representation to various sections like interest and regions in the government. So this promotes a national spirit among the people and it builds a united India. So now we'll move into the presidential form of government, where we'll see a presidential system is a form of government where the executive branch is headed by a president is separate from the legislative branch. जिसका मतलब ये है कि the presidential system, the head of the government, it leads an executive which is distinct from the legislature. And this concept is completely opposite from the parliamentary form of government, where we saw कि executive और legislature दोनों एक दूसरे पर interdependent है. Whereas in presidential form of government, we are seeing there is a clear demarcation or clear separation of powers between executive and the legislatures. So here the head of the government and the head of the state are one, and is basically the one person only. Whereas in parliamentary system, we saw the head of the government and head of the state. Head of the state is President of India. Head of the government is basically the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is like the head of the or leader of the ruling party, the Council of Ministers. So also the key feature that I want to highlight here is executive is not responsible to the legislature. Okay, so let's see the salient features here in detail. The first is there is a clear separation of powers, as I said. So there are distinct branches of government, executive, legislature, and judicial, with separate and defined roles. So there is no overlapping and there is no dependency. So here the executive, it can veto acts by the legislature. It can veto also. So the president has a fixed term. That is, president serves a fixed term, usually 4 to 5 years, and cannot be easily removed by the legislature. Whereas where we saw in parliament that the prime minister can be the head of the government, can be removed. That it has no fixed term kind of concept. So the next is direct elections. Presidents are typically elected by popular vote, not by the legislature. So there we have a concept of electoral college, from where the president is getting elected. Then we have executive dominance, where the president is the head of the state and government with significant decision making authority. So now let's look into the advantages of presidential form of government. So the first is stability. Why stability? Because there is fixed presidential terms that provides political stability and prevent frequent changes in leadership, which means that this type of government is stable. Since the term of president is uh, fixed and not subject to majority support in the legislative, he need not worry about losing the government. So there is no danger of a sudden fall of the government. There is no political pressure on the president to make decisions. Then we get clear accountability from the voters, can easily identify who is responsible for the government action. Also, we have efficient decision making, where the executive branch can make quick decision without legislative gridlock. जहाँ पर अगर legislative को या एग्जीक्यूटिव को एक दूसरे के लिए डिपेंडेंट नहीं होना पड़ेगा, किसी के डिसीजन के लिए वेट नहीं करना पड़ेगा, सो वहां पर क्विक डिसीजन मेकिंग होगा. Then we have separation of powers, which prevents concentration of power and potential abuse by a single branch. Then we have direct mandate, where presidents have a direct mandate from the people, enhancing their legitimacy. And then, if we look into the disadvantages of this presidential form of government, then first is gridlock, that is, separation of powers can lead to legislative or executive gridlock, hindering lawmaking. Yani ke, since there is more strict separation of powers here, there can be frequent tussle between both arms of the government. So, especially if the legislature is not dominated by the president's political party. So, this can lead to an erosion in efficiency because of wastage of time also. So, lack of flexibility, like fixed terms, may limit the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. And next we have there is potential for authoritarianism. That means there is always a risk of dictatorship. As you can see, a strong precedent, it can accumulate excessive power and undermine democracy. Then we have partisanship, where presidential system often lead to polarization and political deadlocks. So here we will have a quick revision through our comparison between the presidential form of government and parliamentarian form of government. So in presidential, we saw there is executive and legislature, both are completely separate, whereas in parliament we saw they are closely related. They are working as an interdependent organizations. Next we have it has single executive and presidential form of government, where president who is head of the both of state and government. Here in parliament we have dual executive with president as a head of the state, whereas prime minister as head of the government. Next, we have executive is not accountable in presidential form of government to the legislature and is independent. Basically, it is one and the same point where executive and legislature are separate. So executive is accountable in parliamentary system to the legislature and can be removed through no confidence motion. Then we have tenure of the president is fixed and can be removed only in extraordinary circumstances through impeachment. And then here in parliamentary, the tenure of the executive is not fixed. The council of ministers they can be dismissed if they loses the confidence vote. Then we have person outside the legislature can be appointed as a minister. But in parliamentary form of government, a minister inevitable has to be a member of the legislature. We'll see this technicality into detail later. In presidential form of government, the lower house cannot be dissolved, whereas in parliamentary form of government, the lower house can be dissolved by the prime minister. So next we have the constitutional form of government. So before we move into this, let me tell you, let me give you a brief about what is a constitution. So a constitution, it can be a set of fixed norms of or principles like a British constitution where it is not written. So we can divide it on the basis of written and unwritten constitution. So British constitution, it is not written. It's just a fixed norms of principles, as I said. Also, there is a written constitution, which is a legal instrument which is accepted in a country as a framework for the polity of country. So we can say that constitution of a country is a supreme law of the land, and it is empowered with the sovereign authority of the people. That is, we say no, we the people. That is by the framers and the consent of the legislatures of the states also. So it is the source of all government power, and it also provides important limitations on the government that protects the fundamental rights of the citizen. So if we see the constitutional government, then it simply means that the constitutional government is government that is defined by the constitution of the country itself. That's it. Itna hi simple hai. And then we have the salient features of the constitutional form of government, where the first is rule of law, where the government actions are bound by the constitution and are subject to judicial review. So basically here we have three bodies, that executive body, legislative body and the judicial body. So the government actions here are subject to judicial review. Then we have constitutional document, that is written or unwritten constitution, I said, serves as a supreme law of the land. Then we have separation of powers, like powers are divided among different branches, executive, legislative and judicial, to prevent the concentration of power. Then we have protection of rights, where the constitutional governments often include a bill of rights to safeguard the individual liberties. So next we have checks and balances. So each branch of government can limit the power of the other branch. So by this we can have checks over each other. So the constitutional government, it provides stability, protection of rights and accountability. However, they can be rigid and subject to interpretation, requiring careful balance between structure and flexibility. So basically this is just a basic concept where we can understand the constitutional form of government. Now let's look into the previous year questions. So the first question is, we adopted parliamentary democracy based on the British model, but how does our model differ from that model? So basically it is questioning the difference between the parliamentary system of British country and Indian, our own country. So we'll see the comparison in our next video, but here I'll say, let me read out the options first. As regard legislation, the British Parliament is a supreme or sovereign, but in India, the power of the Parliament to legislate is limited. Next, it says, in India, matters related to constitutionality of the amendment of an act of the Parliament are referred to the Constitution bench by the Supreme Court. So पहले यहाँ पर I'll tell you the answer is like both 1 and 2 are correct. Why it is correct, we'll see the explanation first. So first statement, it says that Indian parliamentary system is largely based on the British pattern, which we know कि हम लोगों ने अपने constitution के बहुत सारे part बहुत सारे country से adopt किया है. तो ये form of parliament we adopted from the British government. the British pattern we have, because it was very much familiar, we read in the very first beginning of the video कि ये हमारे सिस्टम से बहुत familiar था, क्योंकि हम लोग काफ़ी साल तक इस पैटर्न को फॉलो भी कर रहे थे. So there are some fundamental differences between this Indian Parliament and British pattern. So the first जिसमें ये है कि इंडियन पार्लियामेंट इज नॉट अ सोवरेन बॉडी. अच्छा, सोवरेन बॉडी का मतलब क्या होता है कि एनी इंडिविजुअल बॉडी विच इज कंप्लीटली which is not dependent on anything, which is not under any control. So Indian Parliament, we saw that it is not an independent body. इट इज इंटरडिपेंडेंट. एग्जीक्यूटिव डिपेंडेंट है लेजिस्लेचर पे, लेजिस्लेचर डिपेंडेंट है एग्जीक्यूटिव पे. सो जस्ट टू कीप अ चेक ऑल्सो, जस्ट टू कीप ट्रांसपेरेंसी ऑल्सो. सो इट इज नॉट अ कंप्लीट सोवरेन बॉडी लाइक ब्रिटिश पार्लियामेंट. सो फर्दर द इंडियन स्टेट हैज एन इलेक्टेड हेड, दैट इज रिपब्लिक, वाइल द ब्रिटिश स्टेट हैज हेरिडेटरी हेड. यानी कि ये ब्रिटिश के हेरिडेटरी हेड मोनार्कियल सिस्टम को यहाँ के प्रेसिडेंट के साथ कंपेयर कर रहे हैं. सो वी हैव our prime minister as a head of the government, whereas president as a head of the state. So इस explanation से जो अब हम option first पढ़ते हैं. As regards legislation, the British Parliament is a supreme or sovereign, but in India the power of the parliament to legislate is limited. Yes, now I hope I make sense by reading this option. The next is, in India, matters related to the constitutionality of the amendment of an act of the parliament are referred to the constitution bench by the Supreme Court. Which means कि इंडियन पार्लियामेंट अगर कोई एक्ट एनैक्ट करती है तो उसकी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनैलिटी कैसे चेक की जाएगी, कैसे होगा कि वो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल के अकॉर्डिंग है या नहीं. तो वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट डिसाइड करती है कि अगर वो नहीं है, सो देयर विल बी अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बेंच which is a supreme court, which is the bench of the Supreme Court having 5 or more judges on it. So here both the options are correct. Now let's look into our next question, which says a parliamentary system of government is one in which all political parties in the parliament are represented in the government. Number 2, the government is responsible to the parliament and can be removed by them. Number 3, the government is elected by the people and can be removed by them. Number 3, the government is chosen by the parliament but cannot be removed by its before completion of a fixed term. So लास्ट ऑप्शन अगर देखें, ऑप्शन डी, सो इससे क्लियरली समझ में आता है कि ये गलत है, बिकॉज वी सॉ देयर इज नो कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ फिक्स्ड टर्म इन पार्लियामेंट्री फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट. नेक्स्ट ऑप्शन वी हैव द गवर्नमेंट इज इलेक्टेड बाय द पीपल एंड कैन बी रिमूव्ड बाय देम. सो ये कॉन्सेप्ट भी नहीं था हमारे पार्लियामेंट्री फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट में. गवर्नमेंट इज दो बीन इलेक्टेड बाय द पीपल बट इट कैन नॉट बी सोलली रिमूव्ड बाय देम. There is some hold that is been given to the government also. So option B, the government is responsible to the parliament and can be removed by them. Yes, the council of ministers, it is responsible to the parliament and they can be removed by them if the government is passing the no confidence motion. Then the government can fall. Why option 1 is not correct? Because all political parties in parliament are represented in the government. No, not all parties are represented in the government. So let's see our next question. Our next question is related to there is a parliamentary system of government in India because, so we as we discussed that why did we choose this form of government. So let's see the options. Lok Sabha is elected directly by the people. Parliament can amend the constitution. Rajya Sabha cannot be dissolved, or the council of ministers is responsible to the Lok Sabha. So here if we go to the option 1, that is Lok Sabha is elected directly by the people. So इसका question से कोई relation नहीं है, where it says that if I give you the explanation first. So the features of parliamentary form of government, we read about the presence of nominal and real executives. Nominal और real कहने का मतलब है कि head of the state or head of the government. Head of the state we studied its president, and head of the government is prime minister. Also the next feature we studied about the majority party rule. Then we have collective responsibility of the executive, where the whole council of ministers are responsible for forming the government. And then we have the membership of the ministers in the legislature. where a minister has to be a member of the house. So legislature leadership of the prime minister or the chief minister, that is prime minister, the leader of the party will be the uh, prime minister. Then we have dissolution of lower house. So looking into these features of the parliamentary form of government, we have council of ministers is responsible to the government, to the Lok Sabha, as a correct option. So let's look into the next question, which is, in the context of India, which is the following principles is or are implied institutionally in the parliamentary government? So number one, member of the cabinet are members of the parliament. Ministers hold the office till they enjoy confidence in the parliament. Cabinet is headed by the head of the state. So which of the given option is correct? If I go from the option 3, that cabinet is headed by the head of the state, and अभी अभी हम लोगों ने देखा कि head of the state is president of India. So third option, it gets eliminated. We are left with only 1 and 2. So let's see the option 2. Ministers hold the office till they enjoy the confidence in the parliament. Yes, as I was talking about कि मिनिस्टर जितने काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स हैं, जब तक कि उनको वो अपने वो लोकसभा में, वो पार्लियामेंट में कॉन्फिडेंस होल्ड करते हैं, तब तक कि वो पार्टी फॉर्म करके रख सकते हैं, और एल्स द गवर्नमेंट विल फॉल. If we see in option 1, members of the cabinet are members of the parliament. Yes, cabinet is a form of a small circle of, council of ministers. Cabinet form of government वही है, council of ministers एक cabinet form करते हैं. So option 1 and 2 are correct. So as for this, we have option A as our correct option, correct answer. So if we see our next question, it's question 5. The constitutional government means. Yes, we just now we read about this constitutional government. So first, a representative government of a nation with a federal structure. There is nothing a concept of federal structure we read about. Next is the government whose head enjoys nominal power. ऐसा भी हमने कोई concept नहीं पढ़ा है अभी. A government whose head enjoys real powers. And then we have a government limited by the terms of the constitution. So constitution एक तरह का एक legal document हम लोगों ने पढ़ा कि वो एक तरह का instrument of instruction का काम करता है. So if you see the explanation, constitutional government is defined by the existence of a constitution, which may be a legal instrument or merely a set of fixed norms or principles generally accepted as fundamental law of the polity that effectively controls the exercise of political power. So according to this, we have option D as our correct option. Then we have next question. The main advantage of parliamentary form of government is, we discussed our advantages, merits of the parliamentary form of government. So the executive and legislature work independently. ये बिल्कुल गलत है. Parliamentary में independently दोनों काम नहीं करते हैं. Both are interdependent. Next is, it provides continuity of policy and is more efficient. It doesn't provide continuity of policy क्योंकि दोनों में conflict भी आता है. So there can be a gridlock. We studied. Then we have the executive remains responsible to the legislature. Yes, here we can hold on where दोनों अगर interdependent है एक दूसरे पर, तो legislature और executive दोनों एक दूसरे के लिए responsible है. Then we have option, the head of the government cannot be changed without election. ये गलत है. So option C is our correct answer. Next we have, consider the following statements. A constitutional government is one which places effective restriction on individual liberty in the interest of state. Okay. Next we have, places effective restriction on the authority of the state in the interest of individual liberty. अच्छा, यहाँ पर किस चीज़ की बात की गई है? यहाँ पर बेसिकली दो तरह की लिबर्टी की बात की गई है, यानी कि इंडिविजुअल लिबर्टी और स्टेट लिबर्टी. तो इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में या यूँ कहिए कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट में इंडिविजुअल लिबर्टी के बारे में बात की गई है, which places an effective restriction on the authority of the state. So if we look into the explanation of this, which says constitutional government is a regime type that is characterized by the fact that government operates within a set of legal and institutional constraints that both limits its power and protects the individual liberty of the citizen of a polity. यानी कि गवर्नमेंट के लिए कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन लाया ही इसलिए गया है, इनफैक्ट सबके लिए कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन लाया ही इसलिए गया है ताकि वो एक तरह का लीगल प्रोविजन सेट कर सके, एक इंस्टीट्यूशनल कंस्ट्रेंट सेट कर सके, लिमिट्स और पावर्स डिजाइन कर सके इंडिविजुअल लिबर्टी के लिए. Then central elements of constitutional government, therefore, as the set of rules of or basic laws that establish the duties, powers, and functions of government and define the relationship between state and individual. तो यहाँ पर जो फर्स्ट ऑप्शन है, इट सेज constitutional government, it places effective restriction on individual liberty in the interest of state, जो कि गलत है. So here option B is our correct answer. Next we have a constitutional government by definition is a, so यहाँ पर basically constitutional government का definition बताया गया है. So we can say that the popular government, it is controlled by the people by the election of executive and legislatures. So by this we have discussed our questions, previous year questions related to parliament and presidential form of government. Also, we have tried to cover the basics of these two topics through the different types of questions that has been asked. So once again, I will remind you guys to just go to our website and have a look for our NCRT digest for having a simpler version of NCRTs in a compiled form to save your time and also to boost up your interest towards NCRTs, which we generally tend to avoid reading in our initial days, and we just try to skip directly to Lakshmikant, and then we struggle with all these basic terms and terminology. We have tried and covering each and every topic in a very analytical sense with questions also. So please like, share and subscribe our channel for more such videos and simplified topics and discussions. So thank you so much for your time and patience.